You wonder, how much silence can one person carry? How long can someone keep love buried under walls so thick that even the gentlest touch feels like a threat? The avoidant keeps their secrets guarded like treasure, not because they don't feel, but because what they feel is overwhelming. They seem distant, cold, hard to read, but beneath that exterior is a nervous system stretched thin, a heart afraid of collapse. And here's the paradox. The more they care, the more they shut down. The more they love, the more they hide. Until something shifts. Until something inside them cracks. Until they reach what I call the breaking point. It's the moment when their walls cannot protect them anymore. When the very strategies that once kept them safe now suffocate them. And strangely enough, it's often the moment when you finally glimpse the truth. Not the mask, not the distance, but the raw, trembling human underneath. When silence becomes too heavy, avoidants have lived most of their lives believing that silence protects them. That withdrawing keeps them safe from rejection, abandonment, and shame. When they were children, silence was safety. It was the armor that shielded them from caregivers who may have been neglectful, overwhelmed, or emotionally unavailable. They learned, don't need too much. Don't feel too loudly. Don't expect closeness. It only ends in pain. So silence became survival. Shutting down became instinct. But here's the part most people don't see. Silence isn't empty for the avoidant. It's heavy. It's a prison. Every unsent text, every moment of pulling away, every time they choose distance instead of presence. It all adds weight. At first, they carry it well. They've practiced this for years. They can convince themselves that they don't need anyone. That being alone is easier. That detachment is strength. But silence has a cost. And eventually, that cost becomes unbearable. Think about it like this. Imagine holding your breath underwater. At first, it's manageable. You're in control. You can stay calm, convince yourself you're fine. But then your chest starts to burn. Your body screams for air. And no matter how strong your willpower is, at some point, you can't hold it anymore. You have to come up. You have to breathe. That's what silence feels like for the avoidant. They can hold it. They can mask it. They can stay underwater longer than most. But there comes a moment when the pressure inside becomes stronger than the fear of surfacing. And that's when they break. That's when silence stops being safety and becomes unbearable pain. Here's what makes it so complex. The avoidant often doesn't even recognize this shift at first. They may suddenly feel restless, irritable, exhausted. They may find themselves thinking about you when they swore they wouldn't, checking your last message when they promised themselves they'd stay distant. It's confusing for them, because wanting closeness feels dangerous, but staying silent now feels impossible. This is the quiet tipping point, the place where their own defenses begin to fail them. And it's here, in the silence that has grown too heavy, that the first cracks appear in their walls. Think of the moments you've seen it yourself. The avoidant who normally takes days to reply suddenly sends you a message late at night. Just a few words, but words they wouldn't normally send. The avoidant who shrugs off emotions suddenly looks at you with tears they can't explain. The avoidant who usually disappears after conflict comes back quicker than before, almost as if running away no longer gives them peace. That's not random. That's the breaking point approaching. Because the silence they built their lives on is no longer silence. It's a scream they can't ignore. But here's the thing you must understand. The breaking point isn't just about missing you. It isn't only about longing for closeness. It's about the collapse of their entire strategy for survival. For years, distance worked. For years, it kept them safe. But now, they're face to face with the truth. Silence no longer protects them. It isolates them. Distance no longer calms them. It empties them. And at some point, the cost of staying closed becomes greater than the fear of opening. That's the threshold. That's the fragile moment when an avoidant finally considers letting you in. And here's where the paradox lives. You may not even notice this moment, because their version of opening up looks so subtle, so small, that it's easy to miss. But for them, it's everything. It's the moment the silence becomes too heavy to carry. The moment when hiding hurts more than honesty. The moment when the avoidant, for perhaps the first time in their life, starts to whisper the truth their heart has always held. I can't do this alone. When distance stops working, for most of their life, distance has been the avoidant's greatest weapon, the invisible shield they carry into every relationship. When things get too close, they step back. When love feels too intense, they disappear. When conflict rises, they retreat into silence. And for a while, it works. Distance gives them control. It soothes their nervous system. It convinces them they're safe. But something happens over time. Something they don't plan for. Something they can't escape. The very distance that once brought relief begins to suffocate them. You see, distance isn't neutral. It's not just space. It carries weight. It changes how the avoidant feels inside. At first, space feels calm. They can breathe. They can think clearly again. They convince themselves they don't need you as much as they feared. But then, emptiness creeps in. Loneliness begins to sting. And a quiet ache replaces the peace they were chasing. Because the truth is, we are wired for connection. Even those who fear it. Even those who run from it. Even those who build their lives around avoiding it. The human heart cannot survive on distance alone. At first, they try to double down. They tell themselves, this is what I need. They bury themselves in work, in distractions, in silence. But the cracks always show. They find themselves scrolling through old messages. They wonder what you're doing. They replay moments in their head they swore they'd forgotten. Distance was supposed to free them, but instead, it becomes another prison. Think about it this way. Imagine running from a fire, only to realize you've locked yourself inside a room with no windows. At first, it feels safe. You're away from the flames. But soon, the air grows thin. The walls close in. And suddenly, you realize you can't breathe. That's what happens when distance stops working for the avoidant. It no longer feels like safety. It feels like suffocation. This is the stage where their behavior confuses you most. They may reach out, then disappear again. They may act warm one moment, and cold the next. They may give you just enough to stay close, but never enough to feel secure. It's not because they don't care. It's because they're fighting a battle inside themselves. Part of them still clings to distance. The old protector, the familiar pattern. But another part is starting to realize that distance doesn't actually solve the ache inside. It only deepens it. And here's what makes this stage so painful for you. They don't admit this openly. Instead, they project. They may accuse you of being too demanding, too emotional, too much. But underneath their defensiveness isn't a lack of love. It's fear. Fear that distance is failing them. Fear that their walls can't hold forever. Fear that closeness, the thing they've been running from, might be the only thing that can heal them. When you've been close to an avoidant, you've probably seen this shift happen in real time. 1 week, they're gone, silent, pulled back into their shell. Then suddenly, a message shows up, a small excuse to connect. Nothing dramatic, but enough to remind you they're still there. It's not random. It's the moment when distance has stopped working, and they're desperate for something else. But here's the heartbreaking part. They don't know how to admit it. So instead of saying, I miss you. I need you. I'm hurting. They hide behind safer words. They ask practical questions. They test the waters with small talk. They circle around the very thing they want most. Because admitting their need for closeness feels like handing over the most fragile part of themselves. And yet, their actions reveal the truth that distance has lost its power. This is when the avoidant starts to feel something new. Not just emptiness, not just restlessness, but a deep, unsettling awareness. I can't keep living like this. The walls that once protected them now feel like barriers. The silence that once gave them peace now feels unbearable. The distance that once kept them safe now feels like abandonment, self-abandonment. And this is why the breaking point matters. Because until this moment, nothing changes. You can love them, chase them, explain yourself 1,000 times. But as long as distance still works for them, they won't open up. It's only when distance fails, when silence becomes suffering, that the avoidant begins to question their old patterns. And that questioning, that tiny crack in the armor, is the beginning of something new. So when you wonder why they suddenly reach out after weeks of silence, or why they act restless when everything should feel fine, or why they circle back after pulling away, it's not randomness. It's not manipulation. It's not a game. It's the hidden truth. Distance is no longer saving them. It's hurting them. And when distance stops working, the avoidant is forced to face the very thing they feared most. Connection. The pressure of hidden emotions. The avoidant has mastered one thing above all else: hiding their emotions. They can look calm when their chest is burning. They can smile when their heart is breaking. They can act distant when every part of them aches for closeness. It's not because they're heartless. It's because, early on, they learned that showing emotion was dangerous. When they cried as children, maybe no one came. When they reached for comfort, maybe the hand wasn't there. When they expressed need, maybe it was met with criticism, rejection, or shame. So they did the only thing they could to survive. They pushed it down. They hid it. They built an invisible vault inside their chest and locked their feelings away. But here's the truth no one tells you. Those feelings never disappear. They don't vanish because they're buried. They wait. They stack. They pile up like pressure behind a dam. And every relationship they enter adds another layer of weight. Because love awakens something in them. It stirs up all the emotions they thought they'd buried forever. The longing, the fear, the desire to be close, the terror of losing themselves. It's too much to carry, too much to show. So, once again, they push it down. At first, it works. They compartmentalize. They act like they don't care as much as they do. They convince themselves they can live with less. But every unspoken word, every swallowed tear, every deflected "I miss you" adds pressure to the vault. And the avoidant knows, even if they won't admit it, that sooner or later, something has to give. Think of it like a bottle of soda. Shake it once, nothing happens. Shake it twice, still quiet. But shake it long enough, and eventually, the pressure is too much. The moment you try to open it, it explodes. That's what's happening inside the avoidant. They look calm on the surface. They sound logical, detached, collected. But inside, the pressure is building. This is why their withdrawal can feel so sudden. It's not that they stopped caring overnight. It's that the pressure inside became unbearable. And the only way they know to relieve it is through distance. Pulling back gives them temporary relief. It lets them quiet the storm. It convinces them they're in control again. But the truth? It's only a pause button. The pressure always comes back. And the longer they run from their emotions, the heavier it gets. That's why avoidants often hit a breaking point. Because no matter how strong the walls are, the human heart was never built to carry love in silence. It demands expression. It craves release. It aches for honesty. And when the avoidance suppresses for too long, their body and mind begin to betray them. You've probably seen this in them. Maybe they snap at small things. Maybe they explode in arguments that seem too big for the situation. Maybe they suddenly go silent for days, as if words themselves are too heavy to carry. These aren't signs of indifference. They're signs of emotional overload. They've been holding so much in for so long that the smallest spark can feel like an earthquake. And yet, here's the paradox. The emotions they're hiding are often about you. They miss you. They long for your touch. They think about you more than they'll ever say. They're afraid of losing you. But admitting this, it terrifies them. Because to say I care feels like giving you the power to hurt them. To say I need you feels like surrender. To say I'm afraid feels like weakness. So instead, they keep it all locked away, even as the pressure builds to the point of breaking. This is why arguments with an avoidant often feel so confusing. You may be arguing about something small, a late reply, a forgotten detail, a miscommunication, but beneath the surface, the real fight isn't about those things at all. It's about all the unspoken emotions they've been carrying, the frustration of wanting closeness but fearing it, the ache of loving you but not knowing how to show it, the exhaustion of pretending they're unaffected. So when they finally snap, it's never about the one text you sent. It's about years of unspoken pain colliding with the present moment. And this is where the breaking point begins to take shape, because eventually, the pressure becomes too heavy to ignore. They can no longer pretend. They can no longer silence the ache. They can no longer use distance as their only answer. Something inside them begins to whisper, if I don't face this, I'll lose everything. It's not a loud realization. It's not sudden clarity. It's quiet, unsettling, persistent, and it marks the beginning of the shift. The moment when the avoidant starts to see that hiding emotions isn't protecting them anymore. It's destroying them. And slowly, painfully, they're pushed toward the one thing they've been running from all along. Openness. Because here's the truth. Emotions demand to be felt. Love demands to be expressed. And the avoidant, no matter how strong their walls, cannot escape the pressure of their own heart. And when that pressure reaches its peak, when the silence becomes heavier than the fear of speaking, that's when the breaking point comes. The breaking point itself, what finally pushes them to open up. The avoidant doesn't open up because it feels safe. They open up because silence becomes unbearable. They don't share their heart because they suddenly trust. They share because holding it in is more painful than the risk of being seen. Their breaking point doesn't arrive in one dramatic moment. It's usually a collection of quiet moments, each one chipping away at the walls they've built. It might begin with loneliness, because even though they've convinced themselves that distance keeps them safe, there comes a night when the silence is too loud. The bed feels too big, the phone screen too empty, the ache too sharp, and they realize they wanted space. But now they feel a hollow emptiness instead. Sometimes the breaking point comes through loss, a fight that cuts too deep, a separation that lasts too long, or worse, watching someone they love walk away for good. That's when it hits them. Distance doesn't just protect them from pain. It also steals love. It robs connection. It keeps them from the very thing their heart has always craved. And for the first time, the fear of losing you outweighs the fear of needing you. Other times, the breaking point is less obvious. A slow build of exhaustion. They grow tired of pretending, tired of acting strong when they're falling apart inside, tired of hiding behind distractions, work, silence, or logic, because no matter how hard they run, love keeps chasing them down, and the effort of outrunning it eventually leaves them drained. Think of it this way. For years, they've been carrying a heavy backpack filled with emotions. They refuse to unpack. At first, it feels manageable, but over time, step after step, the weight becomes unbearable. And the only way forward, the only way to keep moving, is to finally open the bag and take something out. So what finally makes them open up? It's rarely one single thing. It's usually a convergence. The longing becomes undeniable, the loneliness too sharp, the exhaustion too heavy, the fear of losing you too real. And suddenly, the risk of vulnerability doesn't feel like the greatest danger anymore. The greatest danger becomes silence. But here's the thing. When an avoidant reaches their breaking point, it doesn't look like what you might expect. It's not always a dramatic confession. It's not always tears and apologies. It's not always a sweeping declaration of love. Sometimes it's small. So small, you might almost miss it. It might look like a late-night text that simply says, "Are you awake?" A conversation where they admit, "I was wrong." A soft confession, "I miss you." Or even just the courage to stay present. Instead of shutting down, these may look like small gestures, but for the avoidant, they are monumental, because behind each word is a battle. Behind each confession is fear. Behind each opening is the echo of every past wound that told them, "Don't trust, don't need, don't feel." And yet, in that moment, they choose to feel anyway. The breaking point isn't just about them choosing to open up. It's about them choosing you. Because what finally makes them risk vulnerability is the realization that losing you is a pain they cannot bear. And here's the paradox of the avoidant. They run from love to avoid pain. But at their breaking point, it's the pain of losing love that brings them back. They've spent years fearing abandonment. Yet the thought of abandoning you hurts more than the fear of being abandoned themselves. They've spent a lifetime suppressing emotions. Yet the thought of never expressing them becomes a deeper wound than vulnerability ever could. This is the hidden moment, the shift, the turning point, when the walls they built for survival begin to feel like a prison, when silence feels heavier than words, when distance feels colder than closeness. And for the first time, they dare to step out. But don't mistake this for permanent change. The breaking point doesn't erase years of conditioning. It doesn't magically make them secure. It doesn't mean the fear is gone forever. It means they reached a threshold. They saw the cost of silence. They felt the emptiness of withdrawal. And in that moment, they chose differently. Sometimes they'll retreat again after opening up. Sometimes they'll take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But the breaking point leaves a mark. Once they've tasted the relief of honesty, once they've felt the release of speaking truth, they can never fully go back, because they've learned something powerful. Vulnerability doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it heals. And if you've ever wondered why avoidants remember you, why they never truly forget, it's often because you were there during their breaking point. You were the one they risked vulnerability with. You were the one who saw behind the mask. You were the one who made the silence unbearable. And whether they stay or go, that moment stays etched in them forever. Because the breaking point isn't just about them losing control. It's about them finally realizing what love really is. Not a trap, not a loss of freedom, not a weakness, but a place where their heart, after years of hiding, finally dares to breathe. After the breaking point, how they love differently once they open up. The breaking point is not the end. It is the beginning. Because when an avoidant finally opens up, their relationship with love changes. Not overnight, not in a perfect straight line, but in a way that marks them forever. At first, you may not even notice the shift. It won't look like a complete transformation. It won't feel like a movie moment where all their fears vanish and they suddenly become endlessly open and secure. Instead, it will look like small cracks in the armor. But through those cracks, light begins to pour in. The avoidant who once pulled away at every sign of closeness begins to linger a little longer. They stay in the conversation instead of retreating. They reach for your hand when silence feels heavy. They share a piece of their day without being asked. These small acts may not seem like much, but for them, each one is revolutionary. Because here's what changes after the breaking point. They no longer believe distance will save them. They begin to realize that love isn't something to fear. It isn't something that traps them. It isn't something that robs them of freedom. Instead, they start to see love as something that makes them more, something that softens their edges, something that allows them to breathe deeper than they ever have. And while their fear doesn't vanish, their relationship with that fear changes. Before, fear controlled them. Now, they can acknowledge it without running. Before, fear dictated their choices. Now, love begins to influence them more than fear does. And slowly, very slowly, they start to build a new definition of intimacy. One of the most beautiful changes you may notice is in how they handle conflict. Before the breaking point, conflict was unbearable. Every disagreement felt like rejection. Every raised voice felt like danger. Every disappointment triggered the urge to escape. But after the breaking point, they begin to experiment with staying. It's not easy. It doesn't always go smoothly. But instead of walking away, they try to work it out. Instead of shutting down, they try to speak up. Instead of protecting themselves through silence, they take the terrifying risk of telling you what they really feel. Another shift comes in the way they express love. Avoidants often show love indirectly, through small acts of service, through presence without words, through loyalty they never speak aloud. But after the breaking point, you may notice more direct expressions. The "I miss you" that once stuck in their throat. The "I love you" they were once afraid to say. The moments where they open up about fears, dreams, or regrets. For the first time, their love starts to sound like love, not just look like it. And perhaps the most profound change is in the way they allow themselves to be cared for. Before, they may have rejected help, shrugged off comfort, hidden their pain. But after the breaking point, they begin to let themselves lean on you. They let you see the tears. They let you sit with them in silence. They let you love the parts of them they once hid. This is vulnerability. And for the avoidant, it is nothing short of sacred. But let's be honest, the journey after the breaking point isn't smooth. There will be setbacks, moments when old fears resurface, times when they retreat again. But here's the difference. They now know that opening up is possible. They now know the relief of vulnerability. And once they've tasted that freedom, it calls them back again and again. So, how do they love differently once they've opened up? They love more honestly, more fully, more bravely, not because they no longer feel fear, but because they finally understand that love is worth walking through the fear for. If you've ever been loved by an avoidant after their breaking point, you know how rare and beautiful it is, because every "I love you" carries the weight of battles fought inside. Every moment of closeness is a victory over fear. Every soft gesture is proof that love won over distance. And that's why it feels different. That's why it feels so deep. Because when they give you their heart, they are not giving you something easy. They are giving you something they once thought impossible. This is why avoidants never forget the people who mattered. Because their breaking point isn't just about you loving them. It's about them discovering their own capacity to love. And whether they stay in your life or not, that discovery marks them forever. So if you're wondering whether the avoidant can ever change, the answer is yes, but not through pressure, not through force, not through chasing. They change through love, through patience, through reaching their own breaking point, and realizing that silence is no longer protection. That distance is no longer safety. That love is not the enemy. And maybe, just maybe, their breaking point is also their breakthrough. The moment they realize that love doesn't make them weak, it makes them whole. If this spoke to you, if you've lived through the silence, the distance, and the breaking point of someone who struggles to love, remember this: their walls were never built against you. They were built against their own pain. But sometimes, you are the person who makes those walls finally crack. And that is not something they ever forget. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want to keep exploring the hidden truths of avoidant love, subscribe, because there's so much more I want to share with you.